That's my chicken telling us it's time to start the webinar. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's 30-minute Cloud Education Solutions, Cloud EDU EdTech webinar. Today, our topic is managing cheating in Google Workspace for Education. I'm getting used to saying that, Google Workspace for Education, and it's growing on me. Actually, I think because education's in there. Before we begin, a couple of shameless pitches. Just so you guys are all aware, this is brought to you for free by Cloud EDU. And Cloud Education Solutions is Google's premier education partner in Africa. We do technical deployments, Google audits for schools that have already deployed Google Workspace for Education. We do professional development and training, as you are now about to experience. And we sell Chromebooks and the Chrome Education Upgrade License, which I'll refer to once in today's webinar. I just want to also let you guys know that 2 weeks from now, our next webinar is going to feature Patrick McGrath from Text Help. He's going to be doing a session on Equatio. So if you have any math colleagues who may not be too enthusiastic about educational technology, or you've been wondering how you can add mathematical symbols and formulas to your Google Docs and Google's Forms, then come to that webinar in a couple of weeks. It's going to be much more sophisticated than what I just described. It's really going to be about how Equatio can help improve maths outcomes while students are working remotely or in hybrid environments. So that one's, again, 2 weeks from today, same time. And don't miss out. We've got another 2 days to register. We've got a level 1, and I should have written level 2. Level 2 registration closes next week, which is the only reason there isn't a bright red notice about that. But we're running 2 Google Certified Educator Masterclasses. These are courses designed to prepare you to take the exam. So they're not in lieu of what we call basics training. We assume people already have a fair knowledge of the Google applications before they enroll in the masterclass. If you are trying to take the level 2, we do require that you have passed your level 1 certification already. But those masterclasses are filling up. We've got great numbers for the one coming up, and it's a wonderful chance for you guys to interact with each other. So today we probably have people in our live webinar chat who are from all over South Africa and maybe beyond our borders. And the masterclasses allow you to interact with teachers from other schools. In fact, that's one of the things that our participants rave about the most, is learning from each other and finding out what other schools are doing with technology. So that one's coming up, and Temba has probably dropped the link in for more information. And now let's start the official webinar. So, as you are all aware, cheating is not something that is going to go away. I have a confession. I did not pick up after my dogs when I took them on a walk this morning. So to some extent, we are all guilty of maybe bending the rules, maybe not always following the rules throughout our lives. But when we're working with students, I think we obviously have an obligation to try to teach what we want our students to be like as adults, and we want to engender good ethics in our students. And one of the ways to do that is to be aware that, according to students, they think cheating is kind of okay. So in this particular study, which was done, it's a longitudinal study that was done internationally over a period of 13 years, 58% of students admitted to cheating on a test, 64 had committed plagiarism, which is really going to be the main focus of our conversation today, and then 95% had admitted to being involved in some form of cheating in their academic life, in high school particularly. So we're never going to eliminate cheating completely. And I think that's something that we all, as teachers, we know that. We all try to create the best conditions to help minimize cheating. And we know we're never going to eliminate it. But I think a lot of people are a little afraid that technology has opened up this Pandora's box of cheating. And I want to try to help quell that fear today, if I can. So it's true that you will see cheating both with tech and without technology. And I think our focus needs to be on developing the most ethical students we can. And at the same time, we want to model digital citizenship for them. Technology does offer new ways to cheat, but it also offers ways for educators to help prevent cheating and also to investigate and uncover cheating and make that into a teachable moment. With Google, we've got some amazing tools built for collaboration, and there are many ways that learners can share, but unfortunately, those tools also create conditions where it's possible to cheat. So students can simply share an essay, and I'll talk a little bit about how that would work and how you can investigate that today. They can make a copy of other people's work or their work that's been shared with them. They can always copy and paste from a website and share a new document. There are all these different ways of sending the information around. And of course, there's nothing to stop anyone from taking a screenshot and sending an image. So that's something we have to just accept as a reality. We can't really prevent that at all. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? We're always going to have students who are trying to be more clever than we are. And I think the critical thing is to look for solutions that will minimize possibilities for cheating and the conditions where students want to cheat. So let's take a moment. I'm going to digress a little bit to talk about non-technological ways to minimize cheating. And of course, the obvious one is to change the way we do assessments. Now, in South Africa, we don't have a lot of control over those summative assessments. We don't have a lot of control over what the assessments look like, but we do have some control, and we need to think about how we can reduce the motivation by students to cheat by altering the assessments that we are required to do, and also reduce how easy it can be to cheat. So we can focus first. I think the easiest way as teachers is to practice. How do we do this? Well, formative assessment should be one way to focus on transforming assessment. And formative assessments are informal ways of knowing what students understand. Now, it could be a quiz. It could be something that you do with the Google form. It could be an exit ticket, right? You ask students to answer some quick questions at the end of a class to see what they understand. I used to think of homework as formative assessment. And if you're the kind of math teacher, for example, who goes and checks every student's homework and how they solve their questions, their problems, then you're using formative assessment. Okay, those are things we do where the mark doesn't necessarily count. And I like to think of this as a kind of a dipstick, to use an automotive metaphor, a dipstick to see how are the students doing. I want to see, is that student understanding, and is he able to demonstrate the skills I want him to demonstrate, or her. Summative assessment. How can we change our summative assessments? Well, one way is to use more open-ended questions. Think about more creative products. So what is it that the children are doing to demonstrate their knowledge? And there are many ways to show understanding. Project-based learning is one of those. Problem-based learning falls under that category. And of course, to recognize that there really is no single correct answer. I think we always get trapped in this mode that students need to demonstrate a particular answer. But if you look at the grade 12 matric exams, really those exams are not bad. They're pretty well developed, and they do ask students to think, and they ask students to approach problems or questions from different dimensions. So I always like, there's a math teacher who I follow in the States, that he is really great at showing that there are so many ways that students can arrive at an answer, and that the important thing is for them to show how they arrived at that answer, and to understand their own way of working, so that once they have that metacognitive skill, they're able to reflect on their own problem-solving skills. Then he can introduce other ways they can solve the problem and give them a bigger toolbox as math students for getting to an answer. So it's not that the correct answer doesn't matter, but that students have to be able to more elaborately talk about their thinking and show the thinking that helped get to that answer. You are all familiar with this. I don't need to show this to you for very long, but I think one of the things we want to try to do is create some summative assessments that are operating at the analyze and evaluate and create level of Bloom's taxonomy. And one way to do this is a really cool tool I found called the differentiator. And the differentiator was created by a gentleman called Ian Bird. And we will share this resource with you at the end of the webinar. You're going to get a link, and I'll follow up to those of you who registered with an email that has the link as well. But Temba will drop the link in at the end of today to the resources for today. And the differentiator is one of those resources. The way the differentiator works is you get a series of, let me get my pointer out. You get a series of statements, and you're able to customize, sort of fill in the blank for each of these 5 aspects. And it's designed originally for teachers to create learning objectives, learning outcomes, learning activities, and be able to differentiate a little bit more, which is why it's called the differentiator. So in this case, I just cook this one up very quickly. Students will dramatize, so that's the thinking skill that they're using, with patterns. Sorry, that's the thinking skill, the patterns. Of the, now I haven't filled in the of the, that's a click to edit. So I would click there and it would take me to the content tab, and I'd be given some content options. And then using Wikipedia, and that in that particular example, I selected Wikipedia. You can select more than one resource. And then create, and now we get to different products. And I just left you with an example of the products page, and these actually go much more in depth as we go down the list. There's actually a long list of written, multimedia, oral, and construction. So you can then select, and in this case, I selected panel discussion, the product that you want students to create. And then there's a section for groups of 3, and there is an option for a group of 1. So you can have these as individual. So you get to select that. And that basically helps teachers to formulate objectives. And there is a series of videos about writing objectives using this framework. A little caveat, this is an American teacher who created this, so there is going to be a bit of a bias towards American language around curriculum, but I still think in our context, it's a useful tool to help teachers unravel some of the possibilities and be able to have a wider selection of possible products, or as I like to call them, learning artifacts that students are going to create. So another thing to think about, and this is really, for me, the most basic way to help us avoid creating things that will encourage cheating. Ask yourself the question, can students Google it? If the answer to that question is yes, students are going to be able to answer this question by Googling it, then you're asking a question that's fairly low. Remember, understand, it's fairly low on Bloom's taxonomy. Now, that isn't always a bad thing, but in terms of assessments, we want to try to get beyond the can students Google the answer and get to something a little deeper. So there's always been cheating, and technology has certainly created new ways for students to cheat, but I don't think it's necessarily, my personal view, encourage cheating. So let's talk about some of the technology options, and I'm going to just use one example. In the example of teaching digital citizenship skills, and in this case, it's identifying the source. Now, I've been spending a lot of time reading and watching TV and listening to podcasts about the misinformation that has been taking place in America before and since the election there. And one researcher has come up with a really simple way to address the challenge with students, and that is to have them, in a real simple way, identify the source of information and making that an explicit step. It doesn't have to be complicated. They don't necessarily have to track it back very far, but just the process of identifying the source leads people to question whether the source is reliable. And at that stage, they're more open to judging the quality of that source. And you can then pose the question, is this what we would call a reliable source? And you can have conversation with students around what is considered reliable. Is it Is this a journalist? Is this somebody who does research in this field? Is it somebody in social media who simply is voicing their own opinion? And then, of course, we want to go a step further and ideally have students cite their source. And Google makes this really easy, right? We've got this built-in citation tool. It's going to be changing in the next few weeks, and it's going to be getting a little bit easier to use. I think right now, the way it's been built, it's user-friendly for high school, certainly user-friendly for varsity, maybe not so user-friendly for primary school. And I think that the citation tool change that they're making is going to make things a little bit easier. They're going to be focused more on using a hyperlink and getting machine learning to bring in some of the data that you can see being manually typed in this animated GIF. We do have a tip sheet on how to do citations in Google Docs. That may be easy for you or may be helpful for you to share with your students. And that tip sheet is going to be available in the resources at the end of today's session. So let's talk about some technology options now. And there are two different ways I'm going to address this. One of them is to help prevent cheating, and the other one is how do we investigate cheating. And of course, I'm sure you all knew I was going to talk about Google Classroom. And the reason for using Google Classroom, rather than simply using Google Drive, is that you can always access student files and monitor student work as long as you use Google Classroom. If you say to your students, hey, go to Drive, make a new doc, and share it with me as the teacher, what's going to happen is you don't have insight into what's happening in that doc if they unshare it with you. So they could share it with you, and then they can unshare it. You won't know unless you're actually watching what's going on with that particular document, and you won't have access to it. But with Classroom, you always have access. So just a little refresher for those of you who haven't used Classroom. When you're in the assignment, you add an assignment that you have created for the students, what I call a template, and what Google also refers to as a template. And you make a copy for each student and you assign it. When you make a copy, Google takes a template, creates a template of that document that you put into the assignment. And then it duplicates it for every student and adds their name to that file. And you then can go in and locate that at any time. So you're able to go into the assignment, you click View Assignment, and then you'll see the students, and then you can click on, in this case, Jin Urso, one of our student characters in our training account, and you'll actually be able to open up Jin's essay and have the full access to the menu and see what she's done in that document. So, and that's all the time. She can't unshare that with you. So you have access 100% of the time if you've assigned it using Google Classroom. Now, you can also use this reality of being able to access things to do some investigation. And there's an aspect of how you can do this in Drive. There's also another way you can do it in Docs. And of course, this will work for slides as well. So let's take an activity in Drive. We've got an essay that we've assigned, and in this case, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi's assessment. Sorry, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi's essay. He's been writing an essay on anti-cheating, and I happened to notice something odd when I looked at that, that it was last modified by Jin. That seems strange. So I went over and I selected on the right side, I clicked the information, and it pops up this panel on the right side. You may never have noticed this, but that panel is going to give me activity details. And in that activity details, I'm going to see what's happened in that document over a period of time. And in this case, I can see that in Obi-Wan Kenobi's essay, Jin did some editing. Now, that might be just fine. I may have asked Obi-Wan to do some peer editing. I may have paired Jin and Obi-Wan to do some peer editing or get some peer feedback, in which case, if she edited, that's okay. But if I haven't done that and Jin maybe is helping Obi-Wan, well, now we've got a little bit of a problem. So I can investigate a little bit further. I can open up Obi-Wan Kenobi's essay, and you may never have noticed that little arrow, or you may not have wondered what it does, but right up there to the left of the share button, you've got a little arrow that will open an activity dashboard in your doc. And that activity dashboard includes a number of different pieces. I'm only going to talk about a couple of them. One of them is the sharing history. So in this case, I can see that Obi-Wan added 3 people to his essay. Again, that may have been just fine. I may want them to do some peer review or peer editing, but it also may be a sign that Obi-Wan is trying to get some help with that essay. So if that's the case, I can look at who's actually viewed that essay. And in this case, Obi-Wan was working on it. As the teacher, I popped in just to see what was going on, but I can also see that Jin Urso has actually not just had the document shared with her, but she has viewed that document within the hour. So that activity dashboard, again, that's sitting in right there in your Google Documents, Google Docs. Okay, let's talk a little bit about version history now. So what if I want to know whether Jin actually did write something for Obi-Wan? Well, I would use version history. And as you are probably aware, Google Docs is always talking to the cloud. Your device and the cloud are having a conversation of data, and Google's saving every few seconds. And each of those versions of the document is saved. It's always on. There's no way to turn off version history. And I think it's really important to tell children about it, to make students aware of version history, because it can be very useful to them, but it also helps kind of make them aware that you'll know what has happened in that document as well. So it can be used proactively by students. You could actually teach this as a technology skill by saying to students, hey, we're working on this essay. I'd like you to name the first version you finish as first draft. Then when they've done some peer editing, you're going to name that peer edited version. When all the peers have edited it, you can have each individual peer name their version history as, Fred's review, for example. And then that final version, right before the student's going to turn it in classroom, they can name that version final draft to turn in. So they've got that clear named version history as a record. And that's always useful. Here's an example of version history, and I used one that was really stark. So you can see all that purple text. That when I click over here on that person, on Alistair, when I click over here on the right, all of the text that he's added, because his color, right, and I call it the color avatar, his color's purple. So that puts a purple highlight over the text that he has added. And it's really clear. I know exactly when he added that text, and I can see what the text was. So if Alistair had indeed been cheating or had been helping Obi-Wan Kenobi with his essay, we'd all be able to see that in version history. But wait, there's another cool tool that makes this a little more fun. And that's an extension called Draftback, which we love to use. With Draftback, you actually get a kind of video-like playback of that version history. So from the moment that essay was begun, you actually can see the writing process in action. And that, to me, as a former English teacher, is really exciting, right? For the first time, I can see the thought process. I can see my students actually doing their writing and see the choices that they're making. It's almost like I'm sitting next to them, watching them write their essay. Draftback is just so cool if you're an English teacher. But wait, there's more. Sitting behind that playback is a bunch of data. So we've got document dates and summary. You can see a timeline of when the activity was worked on, so we know when the student worked on it. We know where changes were made in the document and at what time those changes were made. And most importantly, we can see the writing session. So if this had been done as more than one writing session, or if somebody had helped another student, we would actually see them as another user, and we would be able to see when and where they had made changes in the document. All right, so that's Draftback. Let's shift gears now and talk about preventing plagiarism in a more perhaps forward-thinking way with originality reports. Now, I like originality reports. Some people refer to originality reports as a plagiarism checker, and it is. But the reason Google named it originality reports is they saw it, and I think the educators who helped them develop originality reports see it as a tool to actually teach students to do more original writing and avoid plagiarism at the same time. Now, with originality reports in the Google Fundamentals edition, and some of you may not have heard this, but Google is coming out with 3 new versions of, well, technically two new versions of Google Workspace for Education. The basic free plan that everybody has is not going to change. It's going to stay in place. And with that free plan, there are 5 reports per classroom. In fact, when Google launched Originality Reports, it was only 3. But now you get 5 per classroom for the teacher. And for each Originality report that you activate, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, each student gets to run 3 Originality reports per assignment. So there's a total of 15 possible Originality reports that students can generate and 5 for the teacher. So at the very bottom, you're going to, of any assignment, you're going to see that check plagiarism. You tick the check plagiarism box. You're going to get a little pop-up that says, do you really want to do this? You only get 5 per classroom, and it'll tell you how many are remaining. And once you click that, check plagiarism is turned on. When you make that assignment, when you assign it, you've used one of your plagiarism credits. Once you have done that, when a student has returned their essay to you, when you've got Originality reports on, you're going to see the 4 flagged passages, or 5 or 10 or whatever it might be. But that's something you won't normally see in the assignment pane unless you've turned on Originality reports. Now let's take a look at the student side. When a student chooses to run an Originality report, they're going to see that right in that box before they turn it in. So they're looking in classroom, they're going to see this in their classroom, and they have the option to run an Originality report before they turn it in. And you can see it's giving them some guidance. Text from submissions are going to be compared to text on the web. Now, one of the changes that's coming to Originality reports from Google this year is for certain licenses for the Workplace for Education product, Originality reports will do comparisons within your school domain. In other words, it will compare text on an essay between students, not just comparing text out on the web. That's coming. It's not out yet, and it will be a part of the licensed product, not the free version. So here's the student report. It's telling them that there are still 3 out of 3 reports available. So this is the first one. And it says the reports are only visible to the student. In other words, just because the student runs an Originality report, they don't have to worry that the teacher is going to see it. So this is empowering the students to check their work before the teacher ever sees it. This notice says when you submit your assignment, a new report is going to be created for the teacher themselves. And so we've got the work, there's the essay. Once they've run the Originality report, they'll get that View Originality report. They click on that link and they get a report that looks much like this. Now, this came from an essay that I frankly copied and pasted from the web. I made a few changes just so it wouldn't all be gray, but I took it from a really good article about preventing cheating from Edutopia that's also provided to you in the resources at the end today. And when students select let me check the web matches, when they click that blue arrow, they're going to be taken to another page in this report that compares their passage to what the Originality report search found on the web. So you can see there's this comparison, and you get this text that's highlighted and what it matches here. So that's the student work, and that's what's on the internet. So it makes it pretty visible for students. It also makes it visible for the teacher. So when you run an Originality report, your view is going to look very much the same. But if you need to shift from a prevention mode to a discipline mode, you also have the ability to print or save a PDF of the Originality report itself. So let's say you wanted to have a conference with a student's parent, or you need to pass this along to a disciplinary school manager. You're able to simply pass along the PDF, or you can print the Originality report. And it's going to contain the same information. It's in a slightly more readable format, but it shows you the number of flagged passages, where those web matches came from, and then it also shares the comparison. So the same thing you get in the digital version comes in that PDF or printed version as well for the teacher. All right, that's enough on Originality reports and Classroom. We're going to getting close to wrapping up. I'm going to run a little over time today, but let's talk quickly about using forms. I'm going to cover 5 things you can do using your Google Forms that are going to minimize cheating. The first one, if you can imagine a classroom where students are sitting not socially distanced, but right next to each other with a device, a Chromebook or some other laptop, and they're taking a quiz using Google Forms. The easiest way to help them resist looking over at the next student is to shuffle the option order. So with each question, we have a question, then we have different answers. Google uses the term option instead of answer. And here's an example where we've shuffled the option order. So we've got the same question, which of the following is not one of South Africa's big 5? Which of the following is not? So the same question, only here the beginning of the question starts with a buffalo and a lion, and here the beginning of the question is an elephant or a springbok. So this makes it just a little bit more difficult for students to look over each other's shoulders, see what the other students clicked on. It kind of confuses them visually. But you can also shuffle the order of the questions. So if you've got 10 questions and you have 20 students, those students are going to have a very different experience taking that quiz because the orders are going to come in a different order. Now, there are many times you wouldn't want to do this. When I used to design quizzes, I sometimes wanted to have 3 questions in a row building on each other and maybe building in order of difficulty. So you may not always want to do this, but it's there. Unfortunately, Google has hidden it, and I have no idea why. They put it in the settings under the presentation tab. And that's where you have to look for that shuffle question order, which is maybe why you didn't know it existed. And then the second to the last thing with forms is the ability to identify who's done what and have some control. So I'm assuming you're working with school domains, so that helps. It's easy to tick this and collect email addresses. But more importantly, you don't necessarily want your quizzes getting outside your domain. So if you restrict those quizzes to users in your organization and limit to 1 response, so students can't take the quiz again. Now, if you're using Google Classroom, they're only going to get 1 copy. So that's helpful right there. But if for whatever reason you're giving students a form and you want them to do a quiz without Classroom, it's possible once they've got that link that they could maybe do it again. And they might say to you afterwards, oh, ma'am, please, I got such a better score the second time. Can't you just do something for me? Perhaps average my 2 scores. Of course, the student's already seen the first time they took the quiz and had a chance to do better. So these are some of the settings you would find under the General Settings tab. And then, of course, there's the quiz mode with locked forms in a Chromebook. Now, the requirement here is students have to be using a Chromebook, and you have to have the Chrome Education Upgrade license. Somebody asked me on WhatsApp this morning, why would a school pay for that Chrome Education Upgrade license? And I said, well, my favorite reason is this, having locked mode on a Chromebook. Locked mode forces students to only do one thing, take the quiz. They can't leave the tab or the window to go and search for something on the internet. They can't open up their notes from Google Drive. All they can do is take the quiz. Now, it's not 100% foolproof. If they're taking that quiz at home, there's nothing to stop them from picking up their cell phone and doing a quick search on that device. But it does help to mitigate what students can do, and it makes it really clear to students, this is a quiz, take it seriously. So with lock mode on a Chromebook, it's really simple under the quiz options, again, from the settings. You would tick the box, turn on locked mode. That's all you have to do. And that will push that locked mode out to those devices that are registered in your domain using the Chrome Education Upgrade license. So we've covered a number of things today. I'm going to quickly do a little review. The first and most important thing is always do your assignments from Classroom if you're not already doing so. You can do some light investigations using those activity panes in both Drive and in the editors. I call the editors because that's how Google refers to things like slides and docs and drawings and sheets. And then, of course, make students aware of these tools and how they work. When students are aware of how they work, they will be more reluctant to try and fool you. If they know that you know how these things work, you're empowered, right? You're still the authority in the room. And it gives them a sense of, oh, the teacher knows what I'm doing and can check. And of course, encourage them to take responsibility, develop their digital literacy skills, teach them how to do citations, and teach them why citations are important, as an example. So think about ways you can weave developing digital citizenship into your curriculum throughout the day. So thank you, guys. Really appreciate the time today. I just checked in with Temba, and he says there are no questions in the chat. A lot of people watch these webinars after we've done the live recording, and I appreciate there aren't always questions. But please remember that we've got a fantastic webinar coming up 2 weeks from today on Equatio, and we'll have more webinars every couple of weeks throughout the rest of the year. So thanks for your attention. We appreciate it, and have a great afternoon or a great evening if you're watching this later on.